should be good soon. This is nonsense. But that's not our teaching today. Okay. Alright, mic check. Mic check, let me know if you guys could hear me on YouTube, on the app, on Facebook. Now we're back. We're off suspension. Yeah, sounds good. All right. Do you guys hear the humming sound, or no? Of the fan? Okay, I'll stop one moment. Thank you, Nathan. Okay. All right. All the cameras are sideways, but not sure what we're going to do. A little bit of effect. Okay, so you have to leave. All right. B'Shem Hashem na'aseh v'natzliach, shiur Torah, bruchim habayim. We're back here, Baruch Hashem, starting a new week, even though we are able to miss our shiur earlier, but we know that we can't miss this shiur, as this new series is certainly getting the attention of many people. And tonight's shiur is part of the series of the War of Amalek. It's going to be for the Refuah Shlema and Hatzlacha Rabbah for Rabbi Ephraim ben Shulamit, Rabbanit Sarah bat Anat, Rabbanit Levana bat Sarah, Sarah bat Levana, Avi Mori David ben Nesriya, Imi Morati Doris bat Jora, Naomi bat Sarah, and all of Am Yisrael and all the righteous Noahides. BeEzrat Hashem HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless them with all of the blessings of the Torah, BeEzrat Hashem. So we just want to remind everybody, anyone that wants to support our organization, help us with all of the wonderful things, you could donate on the website bhtorah.org. I know that there's been some technical difficulties on the website and on the app and a bunch of different things over these last couple of weeks, but there's simply many big things that we're working on, Baruch Hashem, around the clock, which BeEzrat Hashem will be released very, very soon, and going to help every single person that is looking to learn the truth, looking to have easy access to the Torah at their fingertips in ways that you could never even imagine. A lot of this stuff is coming very soon, BeEzrat Hashem, and many languages, many different features. So working around the clock to do things that are going to make things better, but obviously there's going to be some collateral damage, let's just say that. So anyone that wants to support, wants to help, you could donate on the website. Also, anyone that wants to distribute the books or the USBs, these are, Baruch Hashem, helping countless people. We have our team in Israel, our teams in the US and different countries that are distributing these books for free in different Jewish communities. You can get yourself a box or more than one box of these. Baruch Hashem, we just had a couple of tzaddikim order a huge amount of books to distribute in a Shabbaton that they're doing at different communities in the US. They wanted to get a few hundred books so they can give to every single person. And this is literally the easiest tool in the world to get yourself Gan Eden. It's just simply so easy. I think that there's going to be a special trial for foolish people that didn't take advantage of it. Also, we have the USBs. Get yourself some USBs, and we're also continuing to send out the extra bonus of books of Rav Nisim Yagen in these packages. So those, of course, are being very welcomed in many communities around the world, Baruch Hashem. So with that being said, they're going to put the website of where you could donate, of where you could get yourself the free material to distribute in Jewish communities around the country. If you want us to send it to different countries like Australia or any other country out there, simply all you have to do is just pay for the shipping. That's pretty much all we ask, because it's just very, very expensive already, and we figure that people can do that much. So, with that being said, we have our series at hand, and last week we got into this. We got into this war of Amalek after being introduced to this sefer by the Kadosh Elyon, Rav Elchanan Wasserman, and understanding why he's even fighting this fight, and why he's giving us this clear instruction manual of the war against Amalek that we're going to have to fight in the not so distant future, meaning the present, and if history repeats itself. And that's really one of the things that many people will logically should be asking, which is, if we have all of this information about all of the trials and tribulations of Am Yisrael, of all of the failures we've had as a people for the last 3,000 years, every time we abandoned God, it didn't lead to anything good. So if we have all of this information, then certainly we should be able to overcome it. Even more so, even if the religious aspect of it perhaps is a little bit difficult for those of us that are spiritually deformed because of our addiction to desires. So perhaps they're not as religious as they should be, but you would say, okay, these Amalek that you're talking about, perhaps we can stop them. Maybe if we have some good weapons, if we have some missiles, if we have some good politicians, if we have some good spokespeople, that today apparently anyone with a microphone and a camera has become a spokesperson for Israel, even if sometimes they're not even Jewish, even if sometimes they know nothing about Judaism, even if they sometimes are actually promoting Amalek. But nonetheless, if we know all of this information, perhaps we could fight the war, or not even need to fight the war, could avoid the war, because we have all this information. So, Rabotai Yekarim, we are now entering a new segment in this war of Amalek, which is from the Sefer of Rav Elchanan Wasserman, and we're going into segment number 3. In the section number 3, Rav Elchanan Wasserman quickly addresses this question of whether history is going to repeat itself. Is it what we call in the Middle East maktub, meaning it's written and therefore it will be, or we can do something about it? The answer is both. How so? Rav Elchanan Wasserman says, Ve'ine, here we have our sages have taught us the key to all of the stories of the Torah. Mafteach lekol sipurei Torah. There is a key lesson to be learned from all of the stories that are mentioned in the Torah. Whether it's the story of Adam ben Chava in creation, fighting against the serpent, falling for the trap, whether it's Cain and Abel getting into a fight and ending up with the first murder in history, or it's Yaakov going and with his family back to his father's house and on the way having to meet with Esav. Obviously, all of the enemies that Am Yisrael had in Egypt, the Exodus, Moshe Rabbeinu fighting against wicked Jews that decided that they want to take the leadership position, and on and on and on. We have throughout all of our Torah different battles, different stories, different lessons that can be learned. But Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman is saying with all of those stories, there is one key element that perhaps we don't know, we forgot, we didn't realize, or we simply didn't pay so much attention to it. And he says, Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim. What is Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim? What the fathers did is symbolic of what the children will do. As the Midrash Rabbah says in Bereshit, 7th section, the 7th chapter, in the 6th segment, 6th paragraph. Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim means whatever our forefathers went through, so will their descendants. In so many words, all of the stories of the Torah are not just there to tickle your fancy and entertain you because you have nothing else to do. It's not a history book. It is not something that is just going to be there for mental stimulation. It's not even there simply to just teach you laws, because many times the laws are not taught within the stories, but rather around the stories. So why do we have the stories? Says the Midrash Rabbah that Rabbi Elchanan is bringing. Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim. Everything that our forefathers experienced in the Torah, so will their descendants. Their descendants doesn't mean just Avraham had 2 sons. He had, of course, Yitzchak, his favorite, the one he loved, the one he adored, the one that Am Yisrael came from, and he also had Ishmael. Ishmael that, although he did tshuva, many of his descendants are our mortal enemies today. No, it wasn't just those descendants. And it wasn't just Yaakov and the 12 tribes. No, it wasn't just them. It wasn't just Moshe Rabbeinu and Am Yisrael at Mount Sinai. It wasn't even just David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, his son, and his great descendant Chizkiyahu, who was a big tzaddik. No, it's not them. Who are these descendants? Us. What happened to our forefathers will happen to us. These stories in the Torah are each there as prophetic messages of what will happen in the future. And therefore, if one studies these stories the way that our holy Jewish sages taught them, they will literally have the clear instruction set of how to overcome these obstacles, the very same obstacles that our forefathers dealt with. And just like you have this here, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman says, furthermore, now that we know that whatever our forefathers went through, so will their descendants, we also know that Maaseh Amalek Siman Lezaro v'nimtzenu lemedim mizeh. We also know that just like our forefathers experienced things we're going to have to experience, the same thing is happening with Amalek. Whatever Amalek did in the past, so will the Amalek descendants of today. They will do now. Ki haosim leachis hen mizera Amalek. Here, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman gives us a couple of extraordinary details that are the foundation of this entire shiur, and needless to say, are the foundation of this whole series. Here, Rav Elchanan Wasserman is telling us that while it's nice to know that we are all Jewish people connected to holy sages, to holy forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's not going to do you any good if you didn't learn anything from them. And what can you learn from them? Their experiences. Why do I need to learn their experiences? Because eventually, at the time of Mashiach that we're living in right now, the era of Mashiach, the same things will be repeated. Just like Amalek went and fought Am Yisrael, they will fight again. So how did it go? We had Mount Sinai. But Mount Sinai didn't just appear out of nothing. First we were in Egypt, slaves, agony and pain. 210 years. That was really supposed to be 400 years. But the suffering that Am Yisrael had in Egypt was so bad and so magnified and so much worse than the original permission that Hashem gave Paro, that Hashem cut the time in half practically. Instead of it being 400 years, it was 210, of which the last 116 years were the worst. But after HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Egypt through miracles and a strong arm, which the sages called a super miracle, not just a miracle, but a super miracle we discussed in previous shurim, Am Yisrael got to Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, where there was another very big test of our emunah, our faith in Hashem. It was another time that the enemy attacked and did not give up. It was another time that we overcame the obstacle by going with Hashem. And 49 days later we arrive at Shavuot, which is at the time we received the Torah. The Torah protected us. But if a person thinks that that would be enough, then perhaps the Tanakh would have been finished already there and we would already be all in Gan Eden. But it wasn't. Because shortly after we received the Torah, we went to Refidim and rested over there, near the water in Refidim. We rested, the Torah says. The word Refidim comes from the word Rifyon, which means being lackadaisical, being resting from the Torah, resting from our servitude of Hashem. And as soon as we got to the Refidim, Amalek came and attacked us. Amalek traveled nearly 2,000 miles just to come attack us, unprovoked, for no good reason that would ever make sense to anybody else. All of the reasons we discussed last week, which is Amalek came to fight against Am Yisrael because that was their way of fighting against Hashem, fighting against the belief in Hashem. So, all of what happened in the past are lessons for us to know for today, for the future. And says Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman that this Amalek is going to do the same thing again. Despite the fact that we had, after 2,000 years of being in the exile, we were able to immigrate in larger capacity to the land of Israel. Many people, and myself included, have misspoken to a certain extent, making it seem as if there was no Jews in the land of Israel for 2,000 years. This is completely false. There's always been Jews in the land of Israel. It's just that the majority of us were all over the exile. In Europe, in the Middle East, all over the world. But in the mid to late 1800s, about 160 years ago, many more Jews started immigrating to the land of Israel, and shortly thereafter a bunch of secular, anti-God, atheist, communist Jews also decided to join them as well. And in 1948, according to the Gregorian calendar, you had the founding of the modern state of Israel. But this and many, many more Jews immigrated to the land. But this does not mean that, again, there was no Jews there. Nonetheless, this was a miraculous event, even though there are some tzaddikim like Rabbi Yaron Reuven that says this was a bad miracle, not a good miracle. There are such things, that there are good miracles and there are bad miracles. But because of all of the issues with the Zionists and the anti-Torah people, but which we'll discuss today. But nonetheless, we do see that to a certain extent there was an exodus. We do see to a certain extent there was a Yam Suf, a near annihilation event. Obviously, the Holocaust, the horrors of it, and other things that have happened to us over the last couple of thousand years. There was an elevation in the world of Torah over the last couple of decades, especially, where there's many more people doing tshuva. But what we are seeing now, more than what we've seen in many decades, is a war against the Torah by Amalek. A war against the Torah by Amalek. In essence, we're seeing history repeat itself. Just like the Torah says, it will repeat itself. And therefore, the lessons of the past are not there for us to know the information in order to eliminate the possibility of war, but rather to enable us to win the war, enable us to have the tools needed in order to win the war. And Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman continues and he says, "V'shamati me'akadosh ba'al ha'chafetz chaim." I heard this directly from the holy Chafetz Chaim. He was his rabbi. Odot Yevtsektia, his testimony over the Yevtsektia. And he says a statement in Yiddish, which I'll translate to English, and the Chafetz Chaim says about the Yevsektia, it's clear that these Yevsektia, are the seed of Amalek. Yevsektia are the seed of Amalek. Where is it coming from? The Chafetz Chaim. Now, why is it so important to know that Chafetz Chaim said such a thing? For anyone who doesn't know, Chafetz Chaim never said a single word out of his mouth that was forbidden. There was no gossip, there was no lies, there was no Lashon Hara. He's obviously the one that wrote the Sefer about Lashon Hara, the ultimate Sefer about Lashon Hara. So careful with his speech, so careful with his behavior, so careful to give the right honor to those that deserve it. But here the Chafetz Chaim does what many people would never imagine him doing unless they learned his books. Chafetz Chaim makes a bold statement. Yevsektia is Amalek. Who is Yevsektia? Was it a bunch of Nazis that ran the Holocaust? Was it a bunch of different Mohammedans that started chopping off heads? Who was the Yevsektia? Yevsektia, Rabotai Yekarim, was the general name for a Jewish organization. Again, Yevsektia was a Jewish organization of RCP, Revolutionary Communist Party of the Bolsheviks, where the communists had created a national section to implement the communist ideology among their own. Who's among their own? Meaning the Jews forced other Jews to become communists. Communists mean anti-God, atheist, war against God. So the Yevsektia Jews fought mercilessly to destroy Judaism by closing synagogues, closing mikvehs, forbidding kosher slaughter, and putting anyone who taught Torah in jail, and even killed them. Here we see the historical testimony of Arab Zilber in his Sefer called To Remain a Jew, pages 37 to 40, where this Yevsektia were Jewish people, as far as the halacha is concerned, but they were the biggest enemies of the Jews to such an extent that the Chafetz Chaim stated, Yevsektia, they are Amalek. Rav Zilber said the same thing. Yevsekti is Amalek. So here we see, Rabotai, that Amalek is not necessarily always a Gentile. Amalek could also be a Jew. In fact, there are many different types of Amaleks throughout the last couple of 100 years that many people don't realize they're Amalek. They even learn their material and admire them. Karl Marx was the father of the scientific communism. But yet he had Jewish parents. Karl Marx, in essence, declared war against God and motivated and inspired millions and millions of people until today to declare war against God. There is no doubt that he was part of Amalek. We have a Phil Marshall Milch, who was one of the Nazi leaders, whose father was Jewish, and his mother then said that the real father of her 6 kids is her dead uncle, who she cheated on her husband with. Meaning that this Phil came from an intermarried Jew and became one of the biggest enemies of the Jews. Edgar Jacobi was a Jew from his mother and father and was actually a former Hollywood producer. Left Hollywood and ended up joining the Nazis. Fought for the Nazis to beat France in May of 1941. Karl-Heinz Lervi, also a Jew that was raised in a religious family, but hated the Torah to such an extent that he created a false identity and ended up joining the SS, the Nazi army, and fought for Hitler against his brothers and sisters, killing them. Unfortunately, Rabotai, many people don't realize that not all Jews were on the same side during this time. In fact, historians and a documentary that is by Dr. Brian Rigg, a historian, showed that there was 150,000 Jewish soldiers fighting for Hitler, meaning on the Nazi army, killing their brothers and sisters. This may not surprise some of you that have been watching my lectures for the last decade or so, but it certainly is a surprise to many people that think that perhaps only the non-Jews were bad. In fact, there were some non-Jews at that time that were better than some of the Jews. Some of the non-Jews helped the Jews stay alive while some of the Jews killed other Jews. Of course, the majority of the enemy were non-Jews, but nonetheless, Rav Elchanan Wasserman is telling us here something that we have to take into account. Amalek is not always going to be the obvious looking enemy. Amalek will sometimes be hiding in plain sight. And if we're not aware of how to identify Amalek, he could literally be living under the same roof as us, and we wouldn't know. So the first thing that Rav Elchanan Wasserman is telling us is, know this, as careful as the Chafetz Chaim was about every single word that ever came out of his mouth, to the point where at 100 years old, he never lost a single tooth. And he attributed this to never saying one word out of his mouth that was not allowed. Over 100 years old, still has all of his teeth. No root canals, no cavities, no nothing. And you certainly can't contribute that to genes at that age, even if you have the best genes. He says, the holiness of his mouth even protected his body. So here he's saying there are some Jews that are Amalek. They were in the past, and unfortunately there are some today. How can we identify them? Should be the next question. Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman gives us that first sign. It's not the only sign, but it's the first sign that for sure someone is Amalek. What is it? He brings the Gaon Mivilna. The Gaon Mivilna gave us details of Amalek, the different parts. But one of the things that he taught us also is that Amalek osim leachis. They are not the types of sinners that go against God just because they desire something. They're not going to go against God just because they desire a girl or a boy or all types of other things. Today, unfortunately, you have to say, both, because you're not really sure who you're looking at anymore. I went to the store today, and to be honest with you, I was confused. I wasn't sure who was behind the counter, which gender they were. It's very, very difficult to be in a world like this. But nonetheless, if you want to identify Amalek, it's much easier than identifying gender today. How? Amalek makes sins specifically to anger God. They're not just doing it for desire. They're doing it to anger God. They're looking to fight a war against God. And therefore, the Gaon Mivilna is brought in a sefer called Even Shlema, that Rabbi Elchanan is bringing here, in a section or chapter called Chevle Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach. And he says this, Ha'erev Rav dvukim me'od beYisrael, v'Yisrael omdim mima'asein. As it is written, v'yit'arvu ba'goyim v'yilmedu mima'aseim. The Gaon Mivilna, over 200 years ago, had the wisdom of Torah that can only be compared to the sages of the Gemara. Something unbelievable. And he brings us something very simple here. He says, the Erev Rav, which is one of the parts of Amalek, they are glued. They are glued to Am Yisrael. Very much glued to Am Yisrael. What is it like? It's like a peel. There are certain peels on a fruit or a vegetable that are very easy to take off. Very easy to take off with it. An onion peel or the like. There are some peels that, they're not necessarily so easy to take off. You can't do it with your hands, but you could easily peel them off with a knife or a peeler of some kind, like an apple or, a orange or so on. Still easy to peel off. But then there are certain fruits or vegetables that their peel is so connected to the fruit or vegetable that the vast majority of people simply eat the peel. Forget about your vitamins and nutrients. This is not a health food, and it's not a health lecture. Point being is, some people eat the peel, even if they don't want the peel. Why? Because the peel is so connected to the fruit and vegetable that it's almost impossible to take it out without exerting too much effort to the point of aggravation. He says that's Erev Rav. the Gaon Mivilna says, that's Erev Rav. Erev Rav is so connected to Am Yisrael that unless you're looking carefully and you have the right ideological lenses, you will not even notice that they're there. You will not even notice that they exist. In fact, the danger here, says the Gaon Mivilna, is as the sages teach, V'Yisrael lomdim mima'aseim, and Am Yisrael learns the actions of the Erev Rav. They learn the wicked behavior of the Erev Rav. As David HaMelech taught us in Tehillim 106, verse number 35, V'yitarvu ba'goyim v'yilmedu mima'aseim, that Am Yisrael got closer and assimilated with the nations and learned from their actions, which obviously was the opposite of what the will of HaShem was. When we are connected with people that are anti-God, we could easily become anti-God ourselves, chas v'shalom. Now you would say, okay, so I won't go next to those people that are anti-God. I won't go next to Karl Marx. I won't go next to Lenin. I won't go next to Stalin. I won't next to Hitler. I won't go next to all those anti-God people. So no. Some of those anti-God people, they're so close to you because they don't look like they're anti-God. They may even talk favorably about God. They may even pretend to be religious. But I can assure you, they're against God. And that's the difficulty. And he says, the Gaon Mivilna, there are certain types of Amalek that are much easier to identify. We're not talking about the ones that are so close that they are like this peel, that you don't know if he's a good rabbi or Erev Rav. Some are clearly the enemy, but some are difficult to figure out. So what about the clear ones? The clear ones are the ones that make sins in order to anger God. What's an example? Says Rav Elchanan Wasserman, Ve'ema ashirim alize ge'ava. These are the rich moguls, the rich people, the rich Jews that are full of pride and simply use whatever money they have, resources they have, power they have to go against God, to go against the Torah. Some obvious examples are like this Menuval Rasha, despicable excuse of a human being, George Soros, his son, and anyone that's connected or supports him. And I wish he was the only one that was an enemy of God, enemy of the Jewish people, enemy of society. But unfortunately, there are many others in Hollywood, in business, all over the world there are people like that. Some are in the front scenes, some are behind the scenes. What do you think? These protests that are going and more anti-Semitic than anything we've seen in the last 80 years, they're funding themselves? These kids still call their parents, asking them for $50 so they can buy lunch. So, of course, these protests and everything that's going against the Torah, going against the Jewish people, going against society, this is being funded by people. And it's not just one person, it's not just two people, it's not just three people. Unfortunately, there are many enemies of God. And some of them are Jews. And therefore, says Rav Elchanan, אי אפשר להפריד את הערב רב רק על ידי קושי הגלות. He says the connection of Erev Rav to the Jewish people is so close that you cannot separate them from each other without the difficulties of the exile that we're in. In so many words, difficulty, hardship, tribulations, horrible situations, Holocaust, pogroms, inquisitions, protests, anti-Semitism, poverty, disease, whatever it is. All of the horrible things we've had in the last couple of thousand years are a necessary evil that is required in order to separate us from the Erev Rav. In fact, if the Erev Rav was the only enemy and there was only one sect of them, this would be a pretty short lecture and a series. But there are 5. Says the Gaon Mivilna, there are 5 different types of Erev Rav inside Israel. 5. What are these 5? What are these 5? Ribono shel olam. We were just petrified to the point where we wanted to start crying about ourselves and our misfortune when we heard about the Soroses of the world, the horrible ones that are causing so much animosity. You're telling me there's 5? Yeah, there's 5. There's 5 different types. Chazal brings in the Tikkunei HaZohar, page 41b, the 5 different groups of the Erev Rav souls. These are called Nega Ra, evil affliction, which stands for the 5 groups, the Nun for Nephilim, the Giborim, Anakim, Rephaim, and Amalekim, Amalek. We're not going to go too deep into each one, but briefly, this Erev Rav is not just anybody that just showed up one day. This all started at the time of Cain. The time of Cain, the time of the flood. In fact, the sect of Amalek that's alive today are the reincarnations of the evil souls that were destroyed during the flood of Noach. The sect of Erev Rav that we also find in the world today came from the Erev Rav that joined Am Yisrael during the Exodus. Who are these? These were the Gentiles that pretended that they wanted to convert to Judaism. But how do we know that they were all Erev Rav? Because they never really intended to convert. These Gentiles were the sorcerers, were part of the sorcerers of Paro. And they thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was the ultimate sorcerer, and that's how he brought all the plagues. So they figured that if he's able to destroy the Egyptians with his sorcery, they might as well join him and become better sorcerers and learn the sorcery from him. These were the Egyptian sorcerers that joined Am Yisrael and became part of the Erev Rav. And the Gaon Mivilna writes in the Even Shlema that the Nephilim are those who are constantly involved in immorality, pedophilia, pornography, all the filth of the world. The Giborim are those who seek to gain honorable names for themselves, even if they are religious and want or even succeed in building synagogues and yeshivot and donating money for Sefer Torah. They are only doing it for the sake of their name, hence Gibor. Gibor is like a hero, but really a hero in his own eyes. All they do is to build their own names. They are connected to the wicked, the Tower of Babel. Then you have the third segment, which is the Anakim. Those are the wicked ones that ridicule Torah scholars. They're specifically those that go against Torah scholars. Like some of these wicked Reshaim in the media, in Israel, in America, and around the world, that have nothing better to do other than mock the Jewish world, the religious Jewish world, and how the Torah scholars live, and how the religious community functions, as if there's no other problems in the world. All they want to do is write and mock the Torah scholars and the Torah community. They're called Anakim. The fourth one are the Rephaim. The Rephaim are those who decide that they do not want to support Torah, and in fact, they abandon all types of kindness and charity that has to do with Torah. They're willing to donate to feed people. They're willing to donate to a zoo, to build a cage for the new lion. They're willing to save some, nearly extinct butterfly that's fluttering around somewhere in Africa. They're willing to do that. But Torah, they simply refuse to do it no matter how many millions of dollars they have. And then you have the fifth group, which is the Amalek. Amalek are those that are in the leadership position, the heads of nations, the heads of government, the heads of organizations, specifically during the time of exile, and specifically those that take advantage of poor Jews. And one of the ways that they take control over people is by creating machloket, creating disputes, fights between different Jews, different segments of Jews. And the Zohar Kadosh says in the first chapter, or first volume, that with these different types of Erev Rav, the Nephilim, Giborim, Anakim, Rephaim, and Amalekim, the Amalekim are those that came from the time of the flood. They're reincarnations of the evil souls from the time of the flood. And they themselves were reincarnated to become the leaders by force. They're not people that are qualified, good people, smartest people. No, usually it's the opposite. But part of the function that they have in the world is to be the wicked leaders. The Nephilim, on the other hand, are called Nephilim because they constantly fall for immorality. All of these people you see that are being exposed for being, immoral, pedophiles, and all the LGB and all the other stuff, they're part of the Nephilim. Nephilim meaning falling ones. Now, here we see, Rabotai, that the enemy is much stronger than we could ever prepare for. In fact, the enemy is sometimes could be in your backyard, could be in your front yard, could be even in your bedroom. And therefore, this instruction set that Rav Elchanan Wasserman is giving us is telling us your only weapon is knowledge of the Torah and the commitment to fight the fight. Now, one of the things that a person needs to know is knowledge of what this is. As he says, there's 5. Which ones are the worst? Which ones are the biggest troublemakers? Says Rav Wasserman, "Uba'alei machloket em hagruim mikulam ve'em nikraim amalekim. Ve'en bet David ba'ad shimchu min ha'olam." Says those that cause the disputes among the Jewish community, where they decide things that are against the Torah. Why? simply because they want honor, because they want to be the boss, they want to tell people what to do, not because they want to honor the Torah. So they're going to tell you, listen, from now on, long dress is not modest. You have to wear a short dress. From now on, wearing a mitpachat like Sarai Imenu is not modest. You have to wear a long wig. Things that are against logic. And then when you bring them, obviously, Chachamim that say the opposite, immediately they attack you. They attack you. These are the people that will reject young kids coming to their yeshiva or their seminary, not because they're not qualified intellectually or even financially, but rather because they simply don't like them because of their background. Doesn't like him because he's Sephardi. He doesn't like him because his mother is Ashkenazi. He doesn't like him because of this. Doesn't like all types of stupid things. Now, there's also those that we deal with behind the scenes that unfortunately cause a lot of terror inside of Jewish communities, usually don't hit the media, but nonetheless cause a lot of damage. That if you don't do what their Rebbe said, either during his life or post-mortem, automatically you become enemy. Right now we have a situation, Talmid Chacham, giant Talmid Chacham, who is very, very devoted to the teachings of Rav Ovadia Yosef, came out with a sefer full of pictures of Rav Ovadia fulfilling all of the halachot of the Torah. Fantastic sefer, beautiful sefer. Sefer that should be in every Jewish bookstore. What happened? A group of Erev Rav decided to put a bad word against him. Why? Because he has some pictures in the book of Rav Ovadia next to some rabbis that they don't like. Since you've included those pictures, that's it. No one's allowed to buy your book. And they're publicizing this and all types of other rumors against them and so on. These are Erev Rav, called Amalek. Now, of course, we have the Amalek outside of the Jewish community that's frum. In government, there's simply no end in sight. People like Avigdor that literally had commercials during the elections a few years ago that replicated the words of the Nazis against the Jews, even though he's technically a Jew living in Israel. In the government of Israel, he had anti-Semitic commercials because of his hatred for the Torah. People that sometimes wear a kippah, but unfortunately fight against the Jewish community in conniving ways. These are all Amalek. And Chachamim teach us, En ben David ba ad shimchu min haolam. The Mashiach will not come until this type of Amalek is destroyed from the world. And therefore, Rav Elchanan Wasserman continues and he says to us, Amalekim em Rashi Israel bagalut. Amalekim are not going to be just anybody's. Amalekim are going to be the heads of state, the heads of major organizations, the heads of all types of powerful positions in the exile. And on them it's written from the prophet Jeremiah in the book of Echa, Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 15. Hayu tzarea lerosh. Our problems, our enemies, our troubles were ahead, meaning the worst ones, the worst enemies, they had the leadership position. וכל עזי פנים ורשעים שבדור הם מגלגול נשמתם של ערב רב ובני קין And know this, he says, all of those arrogant, wicked people that are in the generation, and he's not just talking about anyone that's arrogant because he's really tall or he's really short or he knows how to throw a ball or he has some money in his pocket. No, we're talking about a certain type of arrogance that is aimed against the Torah, against the Jewish life, against the Jewish people. Even if he himself is Jewish. That type of azpanim, that type of rasha, in the generation, he says you should know, they are reincarnation of the Erev Rav that are the descendants of Cain. Now why do we have to bring up Cain? He hasn't been around for several thousand years. Almost 5,700 years you haven't seen Cain. Why does Cain have to do with all of this? Because the Erev Rav all started with him. You see, Cain brought the klipa, or the tum'ah, the impurity of fighting that leads to death to the world. And when Cain killed his brother Abel, the tum'ah glued itself to him. He brought on himself such a high level of impurity, such high level of tum'ah, that it empowered the angel of death. As the Gemara says in Masechet Baba Batra, in page 16a, that the Yetzer Hara is also named Satan, and he's also Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. Why do we need to know the different names that the Yetzer Hara has? In a different Gemara it says he has 7 names. Why do we need to know all these names? Because it's not names over here where one is giving him a nickname of Steve and the other one calls him Joe and the other one calls him Honey and the other one calls him Baby. No. Each name is a job. Each name is a role. And the Gemara is telling us in this specific place that this Yetzer Hara, first he entices a person to sin. Then he prosecutes against them as the Satan. After he prosecutes against them, it's not enough. He then wants his neshama. Meaning that the Satan is not happy with just making you sin. It's not enough for him. What he wants is to make you sin, and then sin again, and then sin again, and then sin again until you die. How could that lead to death? Simple. Each and every single time a person makes a sin, they disrespect their parents, they steal money, they hurt people, they mock the Torah, they do all types of heretical things. Each time is a sin. And the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says, a person that expresses their anger will ultimately become an idol worshiper. Why? Because he's already following the Yetzer Hara on a regular basis. Today he's going to do this, tomorrow he's going to do that. Before you know it, he's going to give his neshama to the Satan for idol worship. And therefore the Satan, what he wants is a person to make a sin and another sin. Because each time he makes a sin, he creates a certain level of impurity that now glues onto this person's neshama. Now, of course, the Satan wants the neshama, but he can't just take control of a holy neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you. That Tzelem Elokim. You can't just take the Tzelem Elokim whenever he feels like it. He has to find a way to trap it. How does he trap it? By your anger, by the stealing, by idolatry, by immorality, by all types of things that are against the Torah. And each and every single time a person makes a sin, he puts more and more tum'ah on that neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him. To the point where there's so much impurity on that neshama that the Satan now has control over it. And thereby gets the permission to take the neshama and fulfill his role of the angel of death. This first started with Cain. When Cain murdered his brother, he didn't just murder him out of nothing. It all started with a fight. It started with jealousy. Cain was jealous of Hevel. That jealousy led to a fight. That fight led to murder. And therefore, the section of the evil that's in the world is called Amalek. Because that Amalek, they're in charge of the fights. They're in charge of the killing. They're in charge of the disputes among brothers. They're the worst type. And Rav Elchanan Wasserman says that those that come from Cain, they're the Amalek. And this is hinted to in the Torah. Meaning this is not just an idea that Rav Elchanan Wasserman is creating out of thin air, or that the Gaon Vilna created out of thin air, chas v'shalom. These are all part of the Torah. How can they see all of what we just said in the Torah? He says, look at the Torah in Sefer Bereshit, Parashat Vayishlach, chapter 33, verse number 2. If a person learns Torah like the Chachamim, like the Jewish sages, they will see an endless supply of secrets. An endless supply of secrets to the point where they're literally going to be able to know what's going to happen tomorrow. But when they learn Torah, like the heretics, idolaters, scorners, and wicked others, then not only are they not going to be able to tell what's going to happen tomorrow, but they didn't even realize what happened yesterday. So Rav Elchanan Wasserman says, inside the Parashat Vayishlach, this is a parasha that is talking about the war of Amalek, because the previous parasha that we had, Parashat Vayetze, is talking about the birth pangs of Mashiach. Vayishlach is already the war, strategy. And he says, you see it, chapter 33, verse number 2. Yaakov is going to meet up with Esav. Now, Esav has come with 400 battalions. Yaakov has sent him gifts. Yaakov has sent him all types of bribes to soften his evil heart. But now, the meeting is taking place. And Yaakov has split his camp into multiple levels. And it says, V'yasem et hashfachot v'et yilden rishona. Yaakov put the handmaids and their children first. Says Rav Elchanan Wasserman here, Vayasem et hashfachot v'et yilden rishona ema erev Rav. This is where we learn the instructions of where to find Erev Rav in the last generation. You will find them ahead. Why? Yaakov put the children of the handmaids, meaning they were the least significant. They weren't the children of Rachel or Leah. They were the maidservants, still the tribes. They still were part of the people, the nation, but they were the least of them. Yaakov put them ahead. He says, why? This is symbolic for the last generation before Mashiach comes. The heads of the Israeli government, of many of these so-called Jewish organizations, communities, and even yeshivot and synagogues, says Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, are going to be comprised many times of Erev Rav, where they are the least qualified, but they were gifted the highest positions, front positions. ואת לאה וילדיה האחרונים, says and the verse continues, and Leah and her children next. Who is Leah and her children? Who is that symbolic of? It says Leah and her children. That is the Amei Haaretz, Atovim Shehem, Kfufim Tachat Erev Rav. Leah and her children, they were the simple Amei Haaretz. They were good people, traditional people, Masorti people, decent people that really don't know much Torah. They keep the basics. They do the best they can. They're doing tshuva, but they're not Talmidei Chachamim. But unfortunately, they are falling for the traps of the Erev Rav. They're under the control of the Erev Rav. They see the Erev Rav making all types of laws against the yeshivot, against the kollel, against the Jewish people that are learning Torah. They want to make us carry guns into a hopeless war. For what? Just so you can get them to stop learning Torah. Even the Amei Haratzot, most of the soldiers, and say, why? Why do you need more? We already have more than enough soldiers. We don't need. In a recent film that we just completed by Rabbi Ephraim and BeEzrat HaShem will be publicized later this week, we get literal statistics about the army showing that over 94% of Jewish people that entered the Israeli army are never actually in battle. Most people think, if somebody goes to the army, their life's at risk. It's not really true. Some of them are doctors, some of them are peeling potatoes, some of them are computers, some of them are technicians. They all have a good use, but they're not all going to battle. And we see right now, as soon as this whole nightmare started on October 7th, they drafted 300,000 people, and then they return a bunch of them but go back home. Why? Can't do anything with them. We don't need that many. We're not fighting China. But here's the problem. The problem is that Amalek doesn't care about what we need to defend ourselves. The Erev Rav's primary goal is to stop the Torah from being learned. Stop the Torah from being learned. And even the simple people, the Amei Haratzot that may not be Torah scholars, they're saying, listen, what do you want from these religious people? Leave them alone. You don't like them, you don't want to be religious, you don't like them learning Torah, fine, don't like it. No one's telling you to like or not like, but leave them alone. But unfortunately, some of them can even be influenced. Some of them can be influenced by the Erev Rav. In fact, everyone can be influenced by the Erev Rav. There's no such thing as spending time with the Erev Rav, learning from the Erev Rav and not being influenced by them. This is one of the greatest dangers that most people simply do not realize. In fact, the danger is so extraordinary that this is one of the things that the Chazon Ish says he was more scared of this, more concerned of this, than he was of the Erev Rav itself and their decrees. He was concerned that the way that the Erev Rav makes their poison look and taste sweet is going to entice many religious Jews that are not part of the Erev Rav, but to unfortunately become part of the Erev Rav, to fall for the trap of the Erev Rav. Because they make their potion of heresy look good. And many times this affects both religious and non-religious, but especially those that are unlearned in Torah. Even if they're religious, doesn't necessarily mean that they're learned in Torah. Many times people assume that just because somebody looks religious, they have peyot, they have a hat, they have a beard, that means that they're learned in Torah. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. So, Rav Elchanan Wasserman says that from here we learn in Parashat Vayishlach the steps of how the world is going to look like. if you're looking at the heads, don't be surprised if you see the head of the organization, head of the government, or even head of some Jewish organization that supposedly means to do well for the Jewish people. Don't be surprised if they're joining with the enemies. They're joining with idol worshippers. They're joining with Amalek, because they are Amalek themselves. Secondly, if you look at your fellow Jews that are not the Torah scholars, don't be disappointed if some of them follow the Erev Rav. It's not because they are always Erev Rav, but rather because they're surrounded by them. They're surrounded by Erev Rav. And you can't be surrounded by Erev Rav, you can't be surrounded by Amalek without being impacted by them. So that is the second. What about the third? And the verse continues, it says in Rachel and Yosef last. Rachel and Yosef achronim. Who is Rachel and Yosef symbolic of? Says Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Rachel and Yosef achronim, this is referring to the Talmidei Chachamim, Shem Shvelim Mikol. Rachel and Yosef is referring to the last generation, the generation before Mashiach, is going to have Torah scholars. But unfortunately, these Torah scholars, the real ones, many times are going to be viewed in the worst perspective by the leaders, by the powerful. They're going to be mocked. They're going to be insulted. They're going to be called all types of horrible, horrific names. They're going to be lied about. People are going to say, oh, they're living off of us as if we really are. Oh, they don't contribute anything. Complete nonsense. All of the major non-profit organizations that are Jewish organizations are run by religious people, are run by Talmidei Chachamim. But unfortunately, the Erev Rav is going to make the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah community, viewed in the worst possible way, and many times hurt them in such horrible ways that many of them are going to suffer financially and otherwise because of the Erev Rav. Va'erev Rav goim me'akum. And for all of those that want to be politically correct and want to make foolish statements like, why can't we all get along? Rav Elchanan Wasserman makes it clear. Know this, the Erev Rav are worse than idol worshippers. Yes, Erev Rav are worse than idol worshippers, even though the Erev Rav's mother and father could both be Jewish, even though his father may very well be a rabbi, even though the Erev Rav could even be a religious Jew, or it could be a secular Jew. It could be somebody that's the descendant of some amazing Jews. Doesn't make a difference. If he's an Erev Rav, he's an enemy of the Torah, he is worse than an idol worshiper. Why is he worse than an idol worshiper? שישראל נמשכים אחריהם, שרואים שהשעה משחקת להם, וזהו סיבת עריכת הגלות. Because this Erev Rav, unlike the idol worshiper, that even if he's a missionary, how many people is he really fooling into their idolatry? Few. Even if he fools one, it hurts us, but it's certainly not the masses. But the Erev Rav actually succeeds in fooling his fellow religious and non-religious Jews to join him, to be obsessed with materialism, to be obsessed with politics, to be obsessed with sports, to be obsessed with anything except the Torah. In fact, to start speaking against the Torah, to start talking about all types of convoluted ideas that are contrary to the Torah, that are antithetical to the Torah. Why would a religious Jew that went to yeshiva ever listen to an Erev Rav? Says Rav Wasserman, שישראל נמשכים אחריהם, שרואים שהשעה משחקת להם. Because Am Yisrael, the holy Jewish people, follow the Erev Rav many times because they see that their fortunes are good. They see they have money. They see they have a good job. They see this guy is 25 years old. He's already making $250,000 a year. This guy is only 25 years old. He's already had $1 million house. Look at this guy. He's not even 40. He's got 2 companies and he just sold a third. They look successful. They look connected. Look, wow, did you just shake the president's hand? Did you just say that you spoke to the CEO of XYZ company? It looks like they're making it in life. Says the Rav Wasserman, that's the trap. That's the trap. That's the test. It looks like the Erev Rav are winning. They have money. They have good jobs. They have positions, power. And unfortunately, a person that's not glued to the Torah and to the right ideology of the Torah, even if they were religious their whole life, or they were secular with good values, to the best of their ability, they could easily fall into the trap of the Erev Rav, says Rav Wasserman, simply by seeing that this Erev Rav, Asha'a mesacheket lo, he's pretty much the hour is playing for him. In so many words, he's always at the right place at the right time. And this is such a horrific damage to the nation of Israel to the extent that it actually extends the horrors and the pain and the length of the exile. It delays Mashiach. It increases the suffering of all of Am Yisrael. Every time you go out with these Erev Rav, you do business with these Erev Rav, you discuss heretical ideas with these Erev Rav, you support the Erev Rav, you should know you are actually delaying the Mashiach from coming. Uma she'evi agra, and what the Gaon Mivilna brought from the Even Shlema, mipnei she'aparasha hi sheshav Yaakov migaluto lebet aviv ועדיין היה בדרכו, היא פרשת עקבתא דמשיחא, ופרשה הקודמת לה היא פרשת הגלות, כמו שכתב הרמב"ן שם. So here, Rav Wasserman explains to us that what the Gaon Mivilna brought us is the clarification that when Yaakov Avinu came back from the exile to come to his father's house, he was in his way. He was on his way, symbolic of the birth pangs of Mashiach, all of the things that are going to happen before the Mashiach comes. Everything that's happening now. In the previous parasha before it, the parasha of Vayetze, is actually the what the Ramban already clarified is the Parashat HaGalut. It's talking about the exile itself. Now, why is it that the Erev Rav continue to do what they do, even if it creates dispute between families sometimes, disputes in companies and businesses and all types of things? What motivates them other than the spiritual defect that they have, an addiction to evil? In fact, even if one were to say, you could explain the Jewish Erev Rav, the Jewish Amalek, what about the non-Jews? Why do they always want to declare war against the Torah scholars? Now, if somebody just hated all Jews, it's one thing, they're anti-Semitic. But if they're constantly bringing agony and pain to the Torah community, to the religious Jews, then you see here, this is more than just a fight. And that's because, Rabotai, the Satan knows that whoever controls Am Yisrael controls the world. Whoever controls Am Yisrael controls the world. Just like the Midrash Rabbah says in Sefer Bereshit, in the first chapter and the first statement, that the world was created with Bereshit, just like Am Yisrael is called Reshit. Am Yisrael is called the head of all the nations, the head of Hashem's tzon, is people, or not really people. The tzon is cattle. In so many words, we've seen throughout history that whoever was in control of Am Yisrael was in control of the entire world. And this translates into history perfectly. When the Egyptians were in control of the Jewish people, they became the most powerful country in the world. When the Babylonians had control over the Jewish people, they became the most powerful country in the world. When the Assyrians, Romans, Greeks, Spaniards, Turks, Germans, all of these different countries were in control of the Jewish people, not necessarily always as slaves, allowed them to live, allowed them to sometimes even prosper. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought an enormous amount of blessing to the hosting country. And when they kicked them out, all of the blessing left with them. To the point where Hashem would punish that nation by wiping them off the map. Wiping them out of history. Whether it's the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Turks, Spaniards, all of these nations, even the Nazis, are very different than what history has them as. They're not even a shadow of their former selves. And many have ceased to exist altogether. But when a person understands the power of the Torah, the power of the Jewish people, and how much blessing Hashem gives them, certainly they're going to want to be part of them. So why would they not just simply let them prosper? You want to be Jewish, living in Israel, learning Torah? Go ahead, enjoy. In fact, we'll even give you some money, no less than what they give the terrorists. After a terrorist kills Jewish people, the Israeli government will give his family money. This is literally the most demented law known to man. Instead of punishing people, they actually help them financially. No wonder why in the last 80 years, despite the world's view that Israel is an apartheid state and how they kicked out all of the Arabs, if you actually look at the history books, in early 1900s, 1904, 1908, there was a couple of different times that there was a census made of how many Arabs were actually in the land of Israel. You're looking at statistics ranging between 40 to a maximum of about 130,000 Arabs. That's it. Today, there's over 2.1 million Arabs in Israel. Meaning, they literally went up. They literally went up almost 1,500%. On the other hand, when you look at the Jewish people that used to live in different Middle Eastern countries, Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco, Iraq, Egypt, Iran, all of these places, the population of Jews that lived in those countries dropped over 99%. If Jews did not move to Israel, from Yemen or Egypt or any of these Middle Eastern countries, they move to America. For the most part, those are the two main places. Of course, there's some Jews in England and in different parts of Europe and Australia, but the majority of Jews are in North America and in Israel. Both have an enormous amount of blessing financially, but unfortunately there is something missing, especially in Israel, where despite the technology, despite the financials, despite the wisdom, the intellect, you're seeing that many times they don't have a blessing. Like right now in this war, a war with a bunch of gangsters that literally should have been finished within a week, if not less, is still going on for over 6 months. There's no end in sight, and it's literally become a national embarrassment that's just causing harm, according to all standards. Even if you're in favor of the war, you're not in favor in the way that Israel is fighting the war. Why? Because you're seeing that the leadership is misleading their own people. Why is this the case? This is because, as Rav Wasserman said, the leadership is Amalek. The leadership is Erev Rav. The leadership today, many times, is Erev Rav and Amalek, because you see how they behave against the Torah. And the government of Israel is against the Torah much more than even anti-Semites are. Some of the laws they have against the Torah, the attitudes they have against the Torah, is literally, it's baffling that they still consider themselves a Jewish state. But that's all coming from the fact that they are already been enemies of the Torah for generations among generations. And the leadership today is against the Torah, and mainly in the government. And this is the primary reason why they don't have a blessing that's a complete blessing, such as the blessing in the war. Because one of the things that the Torah promises us is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that if we follow His Torah, all of the nations will fear us, and any wars that we fight will win. We're seeing, we're not winning. We're not winning. And no one's afraid of us. No one's afraid of us. They mock us in the streets, they mock us in the media, they mock us everywhere. Anti-Semitism has become popular. But what do you expect when you have one of the leaders in the government of Israel? He is married to another guy. What did you expect? Someone that is supposed to be representing the Jewish people is mocking the Torah, and you're making him a leader? What did you expect? In the Declaration of Independence of Israel, modern state of Israel, that was read by Ben Gurion, Shem Reshaim Yerkav, on May 14th, 1948. Famous speech. The whole world heard it. How he declared that we have a right of the Jews to return to their land. What a lot of people don't know is that there was a story behind the scenes that was happening at that time that already gave many people clarification of the difficulties that are ahead. And the reason why that until this day, people that are glued to the Torah love the land of Israel, love the Jewish people, but are enemies of the government. In so many words, they know that they are Erev Rav. They know that they hate us. And they know that this battle is not going to end until Mashiach comes. Why? Because what happened before that speech is that they were writing this Declaration of Independence. And the story behind the scenes was that there was a bunch of rabbis, Orthodox Jews, that requested that out of this entire Declaration of Independence, they mention one statement, one sentence that shows our bitachon, our confidence, and our belief in God. Our belief in HaShem. That's it. We're Jewish people. The land was given to us by God. The evidence of that is in the Torah. You actually put that Torah in your hand in the UN saying this is the reason why we deserve this land, so at the very least, if you believe the words that are coming out of your mouth, put one sentence, not the whole thing. We're not asking you to write a Siddur or a Sefer Torah. One sentence that acknowledges your belief and your confidence in God. Reasonable statement? Of course, reasonable statement. Even the US dollar has a statement that says they believe in God. Why wouldn't the Declaration of Independence of the Jewish state, supposedly? Well, you see, Rabotai, Jewish state or no Jewish state, of course the land was given to us by God, but the government that we have right now was not a gift, it's a punishment. And we already knew that back then, because after the rabbis requested this very simple request, the lefty, Zionist, communists in the government refused, under all conditions, to mention the name of God in any way in the Declaration of Independence. He said, God, what are you talking about? He didn't give us this land. We won the land to our politics, to our ambition, to our this, to our that. Reshayim Gmurim. So the rabbi said, okay, fine, so we're not going to support you, we're not going to help you. And they knew they needed the rabbis. So they made a compromise. A compromise that, unfortunately, shows it was a necessary evil, but it literally shows how pathetic the situation is and how much these anti-God, anti-Torah, Erev Rav, how much they hate God. They said, instead of saying our belief in God, our confidence in God, we're going to say our confidence comes from Tzur Israel. Tzur means the rock of Israel. So the Zionists said to the rabbis, Tzur, you can, in your Torah, Tzur is sometimes referring to your God. So you, when you read Tzur, you can think about your God. For us, when we say Tzur, that means our hard work, our hard labor. That's what we believe in. Meaning from the start, they were already distancing themselves from Judaism, from the Torah. And that's why there's always been a problem in the land of Israel, because there's always been a war against the Torah. The early Zionists that came up in the 1800s formed a group in 1882 called BEIT. BEIT was a few words that they got from the verse from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 2, number 5. Bet Yaakov lechu v'nelcha, meaning the house of Yaakov, going forward. This came from Zionists. It would seem like this is, wow, these people believe in the Torah. No, it just means that they learned when they were kids, before they became atheists, heretics, and enemies of the Torah. The Rav Mibrisk said, if they only would have put the full verse, instead of calling themselves Bilu, they would have called themselves Bilubi. Why Bilubi? Because the full verse says, Bet Yaakov lechu v'nelcha be'or Adonai. The house of Yaakov moves forward with the light of Hashem. Meaning we don't go anywhere without Hashem. But we already saw from 70 years before the modern state Israel that the Zionists hated the Torah. And this is the reason why Ben Gurion, Shem Reshaim Yerkav, when he coined, or was one of the people that instituted the statement of Israel betach betzal Ezram Maginam Hu, many Talmidei Chachamim shivered at the chutzpah of this guy, where he took the verse from Psalms 115, verse 9, that says, Am Yisrael trusts in HaShem and He helps them and He protects them. Instead of that, he says, Am Yisrael trust in the IDF and it will protect you and help you. They changed God with the army. And this, Rabotai Karim, shows the significant ideological difference between someone that is going in the way of Hashem and someone that is going against Hashem. Sometimes you will find that person that trusts in the army, in the Iron Dome, in the government, in the politics, even in the synagogue, even as a rabbi, even as a community leader, even as a whatever it is. How do you know? Simple. See how they talk during these times of difficulty. If they're constantly talking about politics, that this politician could save us, and that politician could save us, and that deal is important to us, and that contract is important to us, then in so many words they are closer to the ideology of the Erev Rav than they are to the ideology of Am Yisrael HaKadosh. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are Erev Rav, but for sure they're being influenced by Erev Rav. Rabotai Karim, the prophet Isaiah told us in chapter 49, verse 17, in the name of Hashem, Me'arsaich u'machrivaich memech yetzeu. Your conquerors, your destroyers will come from within you. The reason why Bil'am was able to beat Am Yisrael at first was very simple. He knew he couldn't curse us. He knew he couldn't overpower us. But one thing he did know also is that he can make us go against Hashem. He enticed us with all types of sins. And when Am Yisrael sinned, they got punished. The Erev Rav is constantly going to try to make us sin. It's constantly going to try to make us go against Hashem. Our job in this world is to stay away from everything that's against Hashem. But unfortunately, that's not possible when you have Erev Rav everywhere. Especially in leadership positions, especially in every community. And they are enticing. So the one thing that the Sefer Hasidim says, that we'll finish off with today, should be a reminder for us of why we should never follow the Erev Rav, why we should never follow the Amalek, despite the fact that it looks like they have more power, more money, more this and more that, is know this, that the Sefer Hasidim says that if a heretic wants to donate money for Sefer Torah, you should never take it. You should never take money from him. That's how bad the influence of the Erev Rav is. Now if you ask, well, how come this Erev Rav, if he's so bad, how come Hashem gives him sometimes a long life, like Ben Gurion lived until he was like 1,000 or something? At least he looked like he was 1,000. How come some of these people live, or they prosper, and so on? Says the Sefer Hasidim 600 years ago. The sages taught us that the heretics deserve the death penalty. But in light of this, there are heretics that continue living many years, despite the fact that they've turned their backs against the Jewish faith. Why? They're allowed to do their sins because they will receive their punishment in the world to come. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, these wicked people, I keep bringing them back from the generation of the flood, from the generation of Sodom and Gomorrah, from the generation of Egypt. I keep bringing them back. Not because I'm rewarding them, but rather I'm allowing them to enjoy this temporary world. Because after their role is complete, they'll be completely annihilated and punished in ways that you cannot even imagine. But rest assured that even though it looks like they're enjoying this world, there is no such thing as happiness without Torah. So their joy is only superficial. Whereas your joy, when you're learning Torah, watching the shiur, learning Gemara, learning Chumash, connecting to Hashem, you can get to a level of joy that's literally one step away from having the joy of Gan Eden. If we only dedicate ourselves to the Torah as much as the Erev Rav dedicates themselves to going against the Torah. Certainly, we would get to higher levels of servitude of Hashem. Thank you very much for learning with me. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu bless each and every single one of us with a lot of success during our war against Amalek and all of his different chambers of Erev Rav, of the Giborim, the Anakim, the Nephilim, all of these wicked different divisions, which we will learn about in this series, BeEzrat Hashem. And anyone that wants to get the teachings about the era of Mashiach that preceded this series by Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman, you can get the USBs on our website. You could also watch the series for free on our app or on the YouTube channel. It's about a 40 lecture series that has a lot of interesting things that have a lot to do with what we're talking about, but very different at the same time. You could also donate, you could help, you could contribute, you could share, you could do a lot of different things. Just go to the website, bhtorah.org or beezrathashem.org, and over there's a lot of different opportunities, as well as to sponsor the lectures each week is also available there. Thank you very much for learning with me. Kadosh Baruch Hu bless each and every one of us that are learning Torah and dedicating ourselves with the strength to overcome Amalek. Amen ve'amen.